Hello everyone, this is Christian Mod Exiton Interactive, and in this video we are going to focus on our username input. Right now we are able to communicate with the server and have it respond whether a username is unique or not, but we aren't actually using that to, say, indicate to the user through coloring the input in the button or having correct icons for the unique validator. And so we're going to take care of that in this video. As usual, I want to remind you that you can find a link to the article in the description below. And without further ado, we will start. Let's go into Visual Studio. First thing that we're going to do is a little sidetrack. I'm going to go into the controller that we created previously, the account controller. And since we're not even using a database, and of course this is being hosted on localhost, so the response from from our action, the check username availability action, is basically instant, and we need to slow it down just a little bit. And to do that, we're just going to come in here and say thread, and that's in the system.threading namespace. We'll say thread sleep, and we'll sleep for about 2,000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. So, whoop, I forgot to, did I rebuild? Nope, it's doing it for me now. So since there's a rebuilt, I need to refresh the browser. I'm going to refresh both pages and let it do its thing, and then we're going to go back to doing our thing. So what I'm going to do first off is to modify the components template. So if I go into the authenticator.component.pug file, I'm going to open that. So the first thing that we're going to modify here, or we deal with, is the icon. So we need to have the correct icon for, I think we've talked previously. Right now the icons are either going to be check marks or X's, depending on whether the validator is valid or not. We need the third icon for the unique, saying whether or not we have actually checked with the server. So we'll have some icon when we haven't checked, and then it can be the check mark and the X. So what we'll do is we'll go into the validator mixin, and I need a little bit more information. Unfortunately, what we're passing in to the getValidatorIcon class method, we're actually passing in the control as the first argument. Unfortunately, there's no real way to tell which control it is, or easy way to tell which control it is from the control itself. So what I'm going to do is pass in the actual key itself. So as usual, I'm going to put the double or a pair of single quotes, and then we'll put the key here. And again, that'll pass in the key as a string to our method. And while we're at it, it doesn't make any sense. So if the user is logging in, it doesn't make any sense to talk about whether or not the username is unique. So we just don't want to display this validator if the user is logging in. So I'm going to go back again to the template, go down here to the username section, and what I'm going to do is I want to have this validator to shown conditionally. So what we'll do is we'll come in, I'll make a new div, and inside that div, or the property on it, I'm going to say star ngIf equals, and my double quotes, and then we'll say is in register. And we'll move the validator inside that div. So if is register is true, the validator will be shown. If it's not, the validator won't be shown. We'll save that, and we'll go back to our browser. And what's our problem here? As error is not a function. I think I've done that once or twice before. Oh, so now we're passing that in. So to clear up that error, we're going to go into the authenticator.component.ts file, and we'll go down to the getValidatorIcon class. And again, the first thing that we're sending in is actually the key, so that's a string. Let me save that. turn to our browser, and we'll see now that we're rebuilt and there's no errors now. And we'll see on the username that the unique validator is not showing. So we'll go to the register, and of course the unique validator is still being shown. So let's return to Visual Studio, and we'll modify what icon we send in or return. And actually the first thing that I'm going to do is create a setter, property setter. So let's go up, and we'll talk about why we're doing this here in a second. I'm going to say set is username unique. Takes in a Boolean value, and it will set the this is username unique to the value. So the reason that I'm doing this is if this was it, there would be no reason to. We would just set the field itself. But what I want is that every time the field value gets set, I want to run this .control username update the value and validity. So anytime the is username is unique field is set, we'll now update the value and validity so that it will, once we get the response, say from the server, it will say whether or not, it'll show it to be valid or invalid. So we'll use this to set it every time. Next, now we'll return back to the getValidator icon class method. And like I said, this is almost enough. It's enough except when we're talking in terms of the username, or in particular the unique error, unique validator for the username. So what we'll do here is say, let me just put it at the top here. So if the key is equal to this .username or control username key, and the error that we're dealing with is equal to unique, and one more thing, and this dot is username unique is equal to null. Remember, if it's equal to null, if the is username unique flag is equal to null, it means that we have not received a response from the server. Either we haven't sent it or we're just waiting for the response. In that case, we're going to say that we want the icon to be return FA question. So we'll return, and we want so the icon will be a little question mark. Let me return, and we'll save that. Go back to the browser, and we'll see the little question mark. I was going to make it, and I may in the future make it this circle with a notch. The problem is, and we'll see it a little bit in the button, but when we make this thing, we're going to make it rotate if we're actually waiting for the response from the server. And for whatever reason, it's off center, and it does this wobbling thing. It does a little bit in the button. So I decided, hey, we'll put the question mark in here to tell the user that this thing hasn't been updated yet. So let's go back to our Visual Studio. And actually, I was going to forget one more thing. What we need is to go down to the create form group method, and then go down to the username control section of this thing. What we did originally was just to say that the unique validator just simply returns that it's true, that it passes. So it's never invalid. So we want to modify this a bit. We'll do that by saying, so if this dot is login, so if we're logging, or if the user is logging in, we don't care about the unique validator. We'll simply return true here. Next, we'll say return, and this is username unique. So if the username is unique is equal to null, then we want to return true. Helps if I do that right. True. Otherwise, we want to return the whatever value it has, true or false. So now we'll save that. I think we're at the point now that we can get a response from the server, and yes, it's there. Oh, but actually haven't set it to set that response in the the event handler yet. So let's go back and do one more thing first and modify our base HTTP service. So when we first created the, say, get method in our HTTP service, we allowed for a way to run code if the response was successful or whether there was an error response. But now we want to add in, let me format this a little bit. I want to be able to run code whether or not the response from the server was success or error. So what I'm going to do is create or pass in another function. I'm going to call that $finally, since finally is a reserved word. And it's just basically going to be the same thing as the other two. So it's a function that takes in, or it will be passed in the response, and it will return void, so it won't return anything. And we're going to do the same thing in the doPromise method. Oh, I forgot that I'm going to go ahead and make it an optional thing, so you can pass in the finally, or you may not, you choose not to. Do the same thing here. But now that we have that, we'll say $finally. So we're passing it into the doPromise method, and we need to do something with it. So to do something with it, we'll say if type of and $finally. Type of finally is not equal to undefined, and $finally not equal to null. Then we want to invoke that function, pass the response. We're good to go. That's for the success, and we'll just paste it into the error. So now we have the ability to run code again, no matter whether there's a success or a failure response from the server. Of course, to use this, we're going to have to modify the Authenticator HTTP service. And to do that, I'm simply going to do the same thing that we did previously, except I'm going to just say finally. The whole reason that I'm doing this now is because I want to do something with the finally function, so I'm not going to bother with the question mark to say that it's optional. So we've got it, and we need to pass it into the get method. We'll save that. And we'll see that currently, of course, once the bundle is rebuilt, we should have an error. Kind of hoping that that was already done before I got here. Okay, so there's an error. Of course, that error exists because we're not passing in the finally method in our check username availability method. So we'll pass in a function here. Just to get rid of a red squigglies for the moment. And okay, so this is the function that we need to modify so that we can see some visual representation of the response from the server. So in the beginning, there are conditions in which I don't want to check for a username, right? So we'll say if, and we'll say this.control username. If that's invalid, then we don't want to check whether it's available or not. And we also don't want to check if this is if the user is attempting to log in. So we'll just say return. All right. Next, we've already created a flag is checking username availability to tell us whether or not we're actually waiting for a response from the server. So we'll set that to be true. And then inside the actual callback functions, all we want is, so when if it's successful, we'll say this.is username unique, and we'll set it to be true. Similarly, same thing on the error. We'll say this.is username unique is equal to false. And then, of course, the reason that we want the finally is so that we can say this.is checking username availability equals false. And as we see here, we're not actually using the response. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them, get rid of my little orange notification. And those were the only reasons we were importing the response was for those two functions. So I'm going to remove the import statement. And we'll go back down there to the method. I think that will save it again. Now let's return to the browser. Let's try this again. So I'm going to close the login so we've already saw that the unique validator isn't there. That's the only thing we need for the login. So we'll return to the username here. We're going to put in our 8 A's. I'll leave it, and now we see that it's rotating when it's looking. Server has told us that it's not available. The 8 A's is not available, and so we're showing the red for the username. The validator shows a check mark, a red X. And the next thing that we need to deal with is we currently do not have a way to, outside of refreshing the browser, to send in another username, right? We haven't said, hey, if it changes, update it, right? So it's not asking the server if any changes are available. So we'll return to Visual Studio here. And so let's go back to the component. I'm going to close the Authenticator HTTP service. We don't need it, and we don't need the account controller open anymore. Return to our template here. The way that we're going to deal with knowing that we need to possibly check for another username is by responding to another event on our input. So back to the form control group mixin, and again the input. We're going to bind to the key up event. So we have the parentheses key up, and that's equal to, and we'll put our backticks, and we'll say on key up parentheses. The first thing that we want to pass in is the event, and the next thing that we're going to do is put our two single quotes and of course pass in the key so that we can know which input we're talking about. Save that, and I'll return to the TypeScript file, and we need to create that method. I think I called it public on key up. Helps if you type everything right. So again, the first thing that we're passing in to it is the event. So we'll say event. It's a keyboard event. And the second one was the key, which is a string. All right. So we will use this. Actually, let me add, now that I've done that, let me go up to the top here and add a field that we're going to need. So I called that field, let's see, private and previous username cache. It's going to be a string. We'll see why we're needing that here in a second. Let's go back down to that method that we just created. So we will return to this method when we want to deal with specific key events. For this one, we aren't looking for a specific key, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create the switch that we'll use later on, and we'll switch on the event.key. But for the moment, we're just going to use the default case. And what I'll do here is, in this context, I'm only caring about the username control. So I'm going to say if and key equals this dot control username key. What I'll say is if this and is username unique. If that's not equal to null, then we'll set it to be null. All right. Let me save that and make sure everything built fine. Yes, back here. Okay. So let's do our same deal. Get our red X going on. Okay. Now let me add another A. Great. So it says, oh, this is a different username. Let me go back to the indeterminate state. I'll remove the focus, and why that did not run again. Let me refresh here. When all else fails, refresh. Red X. And still not updating. So what did I do wrong? It's not equal to null. Set it to be null. Interesting. So that's obviously true. Username is not equal to null. It's showing us red. So then it should set it to be. Oh, I'm an idiot. So there's a whole reason that we set the, we created that setter in the first place. I'm not supposed to be setting the field. I'm supposed to be setting using the setter. So we'll get rid of that underscore and save it again. All right, third time's the charm. So it's checking, it's invalid, add another A, it's checking again, it's valid. And so the downside, the reason that I had that other field is that right now we're simply checking for key up. So if I hit the shift key, press the shift key and release it, right now it's saying that now it's needs to check again, right? So it's checking to see if this is valid again. So that's the reason why I have that cache field that I made earlier. So I'll return here and go back to my if statement. I'll say if and this dot control username dot value. So if the value is not equal to this dot in the previous, then we'll go into this if statement here. First thing I'm going to do in here is to set the previous username cache to be equal to this dot control username dot value. Now I'll save that. Apparently fourth time's the charm. Do our thing again. Get our error here, and I'm going to press shift and nothing happens now. New A, and again shift. So that'll take care of the modifier keys. We could have just said control or shift and all that, but might have the same problem hitting an F key, and it's a lot easier just to say whether or not the current value is the same as what we've already checked. So we'll just do it with this caching variable. All right, so now what we're going to do is, as you see here, we know that 8As are invalid or unavailable, and we know we've even checked it already. We've checked the 8As, then we added the A, and this is very, it's now valid. So if I go back to the 8As, right now what it said is, it doesn't know that it's invalid, and it checks again with the server. The likelihood the likelihood that a user goes from an unavailable name to a name that's available and then decides, hey, let me check again, is going to be small. But if it does happen, there's no reason really for us to check again. I mean, it's basically zero chance that a username that was already shown to be unavailable is now suddenly available. So we need to go ahead and we're going to add a little bit of caching to take care of that. And the first thing I'm going to do is to go back up to the top there and add another field, and we'll say private read only. And this one is unavailable username cache. One day I'll be done dealing with the unavailable. And what this thing is going to be is an object. We'll be a little bit more specific here. This object is going to have a key, which is a string, so indexer for string, and the value is going to be just an empty object. We don't care about the object. All we really care about is that the key is on this object. So let's return to the onKeyUp method, and this is one we're going to modify. So we'll come down here after our previous username cache, and what we'll do is we'll say, actually it probably makes more sense if we set values first, and we're going to do that in the check username availability method. So what I care about is if the username, if it checking for the username, if that returns an error, then I want to note that. So we'll do that by saying this, and we called it unavailable username cache, and all I'm going to do is quit forgetting things, const username, and that's equal to this dot, we don't worry about it. I was going to cache this value, but it's not like it's some long process and it's not involved in time to get it. So we'll just say that the unavailable username cache has a key which is equal to the username, the current control username value. And actually, I'm going to cache it. So the problem that we'll find if we do it this way is that it's possible that the user has changed the value of the username control before the server has responded to us. So I'm going to pretend like that's the reason why I did this in the first place. And we'll say this control username dot value. So now we'll pass in this, oops, username. We'll also put it here. And of course, like I said, it's just an object. We don't care about the value. So now we'll return to the onKeyUp method and deal with it there. So I'll say const cached is equal to this unavailable username cache and this dot control username value. Okay. So now if the object has a property that's equal to the current username value, then we know that it's been cached. So what we'll do is we'll say if type of cached is not equal to undefined, then this dot is username unique, and make sure I'm using the setter again this time. We're going to say that it's false, and then I'm going to convert this to an else if. So we'll check for the cache. If it's in this unavailable username cache, then that means it's not available. We'll just set the username unique to false. Otherwise, we need to set it to null so that we can make another, or we can attempt to find or to send it to the server to see if the current username is available. Okay, so now we'll go back, take a look. Go to our username. So again, we'll put in our 8 A's so that we can show that it's unavailable. So now our component knows that that's unavailable. We have the current network request. Let's do another A. So we have the second request there that shows 200. Now we'll go back and erase one of the A's. It goes back to showing invalid. There's no additional request. And we have now cached invalid usernames so that we don't constantly ask the server whether the same name is available or not. I don't think that we want to do that for valid ones. So if I put the A back on, I don't think that we want it to show that it is available. I think we'll leave valid ones to be checked in case the user decides to, for whatever reason, change it and go back to the other that they've already checked. So I think that that takes care of at least the username and the unique validator that we've had previously. And as usual, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, please leave them in the comments section below. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.